Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some die cut hot dog cards featuring the new Coney Club collection from Hero Arts. This first die set here is called Hot Diggity Dog. Then we have the squeeze bottle die set, and I love how there are some sentiments that you can have coming out of the squeeze bottles. We have the hot dog stamp and cut set with dies that coordinate with each one of those stamped images. Then we have the Many Franks stamp set with lots of punny sentiments, and I definitely have a soft spot for punny sentiments. And last but not least, we have the Cookout stencil set, perfect for creating a plaid, or you could use it to create a stripe for your backgrounds. Now to start off, I'm going to be using that Many Franks stamp set to create a bunch of sentiments for my cards. I'm going to be creating more than I really need for the cards that I'm going to create. Anytime I make extras, I just put them in a little Ziploc bag with that set. When I am using that set again in the future, I might already have some sentiments that are going to be perfect for what I'm creating. So I'm just going to fill up this piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch Hammermill cardstock. I have it in my Misti stamping tool. That way I can stamp it multiple times and make sure that I have a nice crisp stamping. I'm going to heat emboss my sentiments with some Walnut Stain Distress Glaze. I wanted my sentiments to be brown, and I also like to have my sentiments heat embossed because I like the extra dimension and the extra texture it gives, and I think it takes them to the next level. But you could, if you want to, just use a colored ink for it. If you wanted to have some flat sentiments, colored ink would absolutely work perfectly for this. I did use a little bit of embossing powder tool on my cardstock before I stamped it with that VersaMark ink. That way the embossing powder is only going to stick to that ink, and I'm not going to have it sticking to any possible oils that I've transferred from my fingers. Once I've tapped the excess off, I'm using my heat tool in order to melt those sentiments. Now these don't have a die that go along with them, so I'm just going to be using my trimmer for trimming them down. When I trim them down, I use the clear finger guard on my trimmer. I make the sentiment stand outside the right edge of it just a touch, making sure it's nice and even. I flip it to the other side and do the same thing, making sure it's nice and even, and then I do the two ends. And I did the rest of them off screen because it's fairly repetitive. I have my Hot Diggity Dog die cuts here, die cut ready to go. I'm going to add a little bit of ink blending to them just to give them some visual dimension. For the bun that's cut out of Fawn Cardstock and the hot dog that is cut out of Cinnamon Cardstock, I'm using some Vintage Photo Distress ink. For the ketchup swirl or zigzag, I have some Poppy Cardstock die cut there, and I am ink blending it with some Lumberjack Plaid Distress ink. And then for the mustard, that is die cut out of some Saffron Cardstock, and I'm ink blending that with some fossilized amber. And again, it just gives it a little bit of visual dimension, a little bit more interest to it. I have my pieces there on the sticky mat just to help hold them in place. It definitely is very helpful, especially when doing ink blending on things like the ketchup and mustard little zigzag piece there. Those are a little bit more delicate, so it's nice to have something to grip them. This die set also has a few extra pieces to it. These little grill marks here are perfect for on that hot dog. And then there's some little kind of cube pieces. I assumed it was like diced onion, so I die cut that out of some Alabaster Cardstock, and I will glue it onto my hot dog once it's assembled. And then there's also little teeny tiny sesame seeds. They're actually on that piece of white cardstock to the left of me there, but they're really difficult to see. They're super, super tiny. So both for the onions as well as for the little sesame seeds, I'm going to be using the glue and just putting dots of glue where I want them to go, and then picking them up with the wax tip tool from the Handy tool set. Those are perfect for helping to assemble this. I'm gluing everything together with liquid glue. I use my liquid glue for most things on my cards. Not only does it go a long way because you don't need to use a ton of it, but by having a liquid glue, it helps that you can move and shimmy things in place and make sure that you get nice and perfect placement with your die cuts. So you can see the little bits on my piece of cardstock there a little bit better than you could see in the last screen. So again, I'm just doing about 4 or 5 different dots for the onion pieces, lifting them up with that wax tip tool, flipping them over if they happen to be upside down. I want to make sure that we have the right side up. Although these are just those tiny details that I think take things to the next level. So if you happen to have a die cut or two that is upside down, I don't think it's going to be as visible. There are a few different options with this die set, and I love the fact that you can really customize your hot dog to your liking. However, I personally like sauteed mushrooms on my hot dogs. I assumed this was normal, and I don't remember if I did have them like this growing up. My husband was the one that told me that it was not normal. So there's no mushrooms in this set to have on your hot dogs, which is how I would have them on mine, but that's totally fine. So once I have those little onion pieces on there, I just did a bunch of dots, teeny tiny ones, because those little sesame seeds are really quite tiny. And I'm just picking them up from the sheet on my left and putting them right on those little teeny tiny dots of glue. I'm not even worried about whether they are right side up or not, because those pieces are so tiny, you can't even tell if they're right side up or not. Once I have those done, I'm going to set this aside to completely dry, and I'm going to be using that cookout stencil for creating a plaid for the background for my card. So once again, I'm using my sticky mat to hold my cardstock in place, and you could do this on an angle if you wanted to change it up just a little bit, but I'm going to be doing it with in parallel lines with the edges of my cardstock. Stencil set has 2 different layers, both of them lines. The second one, the lines go in between the lines from the first one. In order to help line everything up, I just use a bit of painter's tape on my sticky mat on the top left corner and the bottom right corner. You don't necessarily need it on all 4 corners. If those 2 corners are aligned, everything else is aligned. I do the first stripes, and then I turn the stencil a quarter turn and do the rest for the plaid. I'm doing this one here with some fossilized amber, and I'm going to be doing a different color for the next one. You can really have any combination of colors for this, and I love the fact that you can create a super easy plaid with this. You could use just one stencil, you could use both of them, you could do stripes. So there's a lot of different ways that you could use this stencil, and I think it's got a lot of possibilities to it. Once I have that second stencil down and did the first layer of it, I did that in the Lumberjack Plaid Distress ink. I'm going to turn that a quarter turn and then do the next layer. And you can see as I'm stenciling, I'm not making it completely even the whole way. Personally, I like when my backgrounds have some darker areas and some lighter areas. I think it just looks a little bit more visually interesting, and that's what I tend to go for. I'm going to do a red mat around this plaid background, and I trimmed that to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My plaid piece there is trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. You can see that I use that red piece there to die cut my pieces for my cards. Once we have that plaid piece on top of there as well as our die cuts, you're never going to know that anything was die cut out of there, and it's just a great way to extend your cardstock a little bit, especially specialty cardstocks. But in this case, I'm running low on my poppy cardstock, so it was a great way to just make that go just a little bit further and use up a little bit less cardstock for creating these cards. So I put the hot dog towards the bottom of this card, and I chose the Franks for Being a Friend sentiment for this one and put it towards the top. I just love that little plaid background. It reminds me of little tablecloths or the little wax, I think it's wax, parchment paper, little insert things for those cardboard boxes. I just think it's perfect for this particular collection. So for the next card, I'm going to use that same Hot Diggity Dog die set, but I'm just going to change it up a little bit. We have that little box there that I have die cut out of poppy cardstock. The Frank is die cut out of cinnamon cardstock. I'm not going to be doing a bun with this one. I have a little swiggle of mustard there, and then I have these pieces up towards the top right of my mat that I am thinking are maybe like sliced onions. I could be completely wrong. It could be sauerkraut. I don't really actually know. If you have a guess as to what exactly that is. My only reason for not thinking it's onions is because we already have those diced onion bits, and I think it might be something else. On the front of the package, they have it done in yellow, but I'm not really sure what it is. So if you have a guess, put it in the comments, because I'm totally curious as to what it could possibly be. Maybe it's even hot peppers, I don't know. So once I have those pieces ink blended, I'm going to add those grill marks to the Franks now, or the Frank. Now this time I just added stripes of glue on the die cut itself, and I'm just using my wax tool to pick up those stripes and put them onto that piece. And the last one, I used my tweezers to hold those die cuts and then put the glue on and then lay them down. So I did them both ways. I think this way goes a little bit quicker than the other way. but really it's personal preference as to which way you want to do it. So I added that little swirl of mustard, and now I'm adding my little sliced onions or whatever these pieces are. Again, it just adds some extra texture to it, and I love the fact that we can really customize these things here. So there's one large cluster and there's a bunch of smaller clusters. I just die cut one of each one of them. I'm just laying them on top. For this one, I'm going to do another plaid background, but I'm just going to change the colors up a little bit. Again, I like the fact that you can customize the background and have them just in a few different ways. So I laid that piece to the side. I have my piece of Hammermill cardstock that I put on my mat. I'm going to reuse my little painter tape corners there. Again, it just makes it really easy for lining up the stencil. That way you don't have to make sure to figure everything out. You can just turn it a quarter turn, line up those two corners, and away we go. So for this one, I started with the red for this layer, and I do clean my stencils up between cards. I want to make sure that I have nice, clean, and dry stencils between them. If you were doing a bunch of backgrounds with the same colors, you could just lay them to the side and reuse them, but I wanted to create different color combinations for my backgrounds. So for this card, I did the first layer of plaid with the Lumberjack Plaid Distress ink. The second layer I'm going to do with weathered wood. So this is just a nice blue-gray that I think coordinates really nicely with that red. Not quite as bright as the yellow for that background, but I think it works well with that red. So once I have that first layer down, I can turn that a quarter turn, then I can do the second layer with that same weathered wood distress ink. Now I didn't really notice when I put it down that I didn't actually press the sides of the stencil down onto my sticky mat. You definitely want to do that, make it a little bit more secure so that you have a little bit more control over that background. And just like the first one, some layers or some areas are heavier with the ink, some areas are lighter with the ink. I'm going to mat this with some blue cardstock. This is Celestial cardstock trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And my plaid piece is trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I'm going to put my frank with the container a little bit in the middle of this particular card and then add my sentiment to the bottom of it. You can obviously get really creative with it. You could even use a layered die cut in order to create different mats on there, but I do like the plain just trimmed down pieces. For the next card, I'm going to be using the squeeze bottle dies. For the mustard container or squeeze bottle, I have it die cut out of Saffron Cardstock. For the ketchup squeeze bottle, I have it die cut out of Poppy Cardstock. And I'm going to glue all of my pieces together, let that glue set for just a minute or so, and then I'm going to add a little bit of ink blending just to add that color dimension to it. Off to the side, I also have the sentiments from this set die cut out of the same colors as well, because I thought it would be fun to have that sentiment with or coming out of the squeeze bottle on our card background. So on that red one, I'm going to be doing the ink blending with Lumberjack Plaid Distress ink. On the yellow one, I'm doing the ink blending with Fossilized Amber Distress ink. You can see there's not a ton of color difference, but it does add some extra dimension to it, or visual dimension to it, by having that ink blending on there. For the background for this one, I'm going to be using this plaid stencil, but I'm not going to be going all the way out to the edges. I'm going to be kind of doing just a random plaid behind there. Again, just a different way of using this stencil set. You don't have to go all the way out to the edges. This just makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. So for this layer, or for these first two layers here, I'm using that Fossilized Amber. So the same color that I used for ink blending the mustard container. For the second one, I'm going to be using the weathered wood. You could always change this to the Lumberjack Plaid if you wanted, but I thought it might be a little bit more interesting to have a different color on that background rather than having both colors of that plaid match the condiment containers. So once we have that second layer with that weathered wood, our background here is done. And off screen, I trimmed that plaid layer to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. The saffron layer here is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So I'm going to kind of dry fit my pieces on my card just to figure out where to put those sentiments before I start to actually glue them on the card. When gluing the layers on the card, I have this large acrylic block that I often put on top of things to hold everything in place, but it also works perfectly if I want to figure out the layout for something. So I can see it right on top of the pieces on my background. I can see how everything is going to look, figure out exactly where I want to lay those pieces. I can put that acrylic acrylic block to the side and know exactly how I plan to do it before I start to glue anything down. So I'm starting with the mustard hot dog. So I did that towards the bottom. Now I have the little ketchup love you, and you don't necessarily need to put both of these on a card. I just thought they were good together. I'm also going to be adding one of the sub-sentiments from the Many Franks stamp set. There's one that says, "We condiment each other," and I thought that was perfect with these little mustard and ketchup squeeze bottles with this other sentiment on there. So I liked the combination of them all together, but if that is too many sentiments for you on a card, you absolutely don't need to add this many. I just thought they all went together really well. Now I'm going to let that dry for a few moments, but I want my mustard and ketchup to be shiny, like it's actually condiments on there. So I'm going to add some glossy accents to the top. Now I'm coming to the end of my glossy accents bottle, so it's flowing out of my bottle a little bit more liberally than it normally does. So I have some areas on those sentiments where the glossy accents has actually come off of the sentiment and gone onto my background. I use a die pick tool in order to clean that up. This one is the die pick tool from the Handy tool set. And this obviously needs to be done while that glossy accents is still liquid. We can't let that set and then try to do it, but it definitely helps to clean it up a little bit better. Another option would be like a corner of some cardstock. That would help as well. But you definitely want to take the time to clean that up because it looks so much better. And putting that glossy accents on that cardstock is so worth it. It adds that extra shiny bit of texture, and I think it just finishes off the card. Another option would be to use some glossy cardstock, and I do have red glossy cardstock from the Ruby Treasured cardstock pack, but I don't have one that's really a yellow. So aside from using some alcohol ink cardstock and creating some with alcohol ink, this is the best way to do it. For the next two cards, I'm going to be using some stamps from the Hot Dog Stamp and Cut. I'm going to heat emboss them with that walnut stain embossing glaze. I'm filling up a quarter sheet of Hammermill cardstock here with the images as well as the sentiments that I want for these. Now they have a few different birthday accessories with them. I'm doing that as well. And then there's also a little dog sweater. I plan on coloring these with Copic markers. Now, when it comes to coloring with Copic markers can start to break down embossing powders. So you need to color very carefully with them because we don't want to be going over top of that embossing powder a lot, dulling it and breaking it down. So as I am coloring in the areas within that embossing, I am taking the time to make sure not to go over top of that embossing. The only time I go over top of the embossing is right for the dog's face with the eyes and the nose, and I just do it really, really quickly. I don't go back over it and over it and over it and over it because that's where it starts to break down that embossing and it changes the finish on it, of it. The first two colors I'm using are R17 and R24 for the red areas. I'm going to be using that on the stripes to the hat. Now I used two colors here for the shading. The stripes to the hat are really quite tiny, so you could get away with not adding any shading to it. But because I'm going to add that shading to the hot dog as well as the dog itself, I thought it would be nice to have a little bit of shading for the yellow as well as some of those red areas. Now for the dog sweater here, I'm using the red for the heart the hearts as well as the trim. Those areas are quite tiny, so I don't bother with the shading, as well as the fact that they have embossed details in them. So I don't bother, I just do this one color and then leave it at that. The next two colors I'm using here is Y02 and Y08 for the yellow accents on the hat, the little swirl of mustard on the hot dog, as well as the balloon. Go in with the Y02 first, which is the lighter color. Add some of the shading with the Y08, which is the darker color. Now, when it comes to blending between those two colors, I will do it with the balloon. I'm going to be avoiding the embossing glaze again. And I did a little bit with that mustard, although those areas are so tiny that it's really not as noticeable if you don't go back over them. For the hot dog wiener itself, I have E04 and E07. However, there's only teeny tiny slivers of both or of that showing. So one color would really be sufficient here because they're minuscule slivers. For the dog as well as the hot dog, I have, or hot dog bun, I have E33, E35, and E37. For the bun itself, I'm going to do the lighter two colors, which is the 35 and 33. I start with the 33 first, then I go in with the 35 and add just a little bit of shadow, then go back with the 33 and just go over the whole thing just to blend those two colors together. And again, I'm working fairly quickly, but I'm also taking the time to make sure to stay away from the embossing as much as possible. I'm not going back and forth over that embossing. I'm kind of going up to the edge, but really not doing a whole lot besides that. I'm being very, very careful to not smear that around. For the dog, I'm doing the two darker browns. So we have E35 and E37. I do the light color first, go in with the E37 second to do some of the shading areas, then go back in with the lighter color to blend those two together. So this first hot dog here, we've got a hot dog bun for the body as well as the wiener and the mustard. For the second one, we just have the dog body. That is the one where I'm going to put that little dog sweater on top. So I am going to be doing the whole body, but about 2/3 of the actual body of that dog is going to be covered for the sweater, so it doesn't need to be perfect coloring here. Another option here would be to do this on watercolor cardstock and watercolor it, or to use some Bristol cardstock and color it with some Prismacolor pencils. You could even use dye-based markers if that is how you like to color. It's not my preference for coloring, but is absolutely an option here if that is how you like to color your images. These are just fun ones to color, and I did the embossing simply because I like the different color around the outside edges. But again, just like my sentiments, I like how the images have a little bit different texture from the colored marker. I think it just adds something to those images, having that little bit of extra embossed texture to it. But again, that is a step that if that's not your cup of tea, you absolutely can omit that if you want. Now, once I have all of my images colored, we are going to die cut them. This set has coordinating die cuts for all of these images as well as the sentiments. I'm going to use a little bit of Best Ever Craft tape in order to tape those dies in place. I always like to make sure that my dies are going to stay exactly where I put them. So I always like to use that Best Ever Craft tape to tape it in place. And I just reuse that craft tape probably a half a dozen times until it doesn't really stick too much anymore. So you get a lot of use out of a roll of that Best Ever Craft tape. The only time I don't reuse it is when I do the technique with an embossing folder where I'm inking it and I get ink all over the place. You could technically wipe that off of the tape if you wanted to, but I don't bother because I tend to get ink all over the place if I try to do that. So I reuse those pieces until they don't stick really well anymore. So we have all of our pieces here ready to go. So on the one dog, I'm adding the dog sweater as well as that birthday hat. The other one is going to be holding the balloon in its mouth. Now, to add a little bit of interest to these cards, I'm using the Squiggly rectangle die set. This is from a previous collection, but to me that squiggly rectangle kind of looks like the squiggles of mustard and ketchup on those hot dogs. So I thought this would be a fun border that went along with the theme. So for this card here, I have an outside part done with Saffron Cardstock. I used the die to cut a Saffron Cardstock rectangle squiggle. I'll be using it on the next card, but I thought it would be fun to use the outer part from that squiggle for an outer frame for this card. I have an inner rectangle die cut out of the Poppy cardstock. I'm not going to be using the outer frame from that for the next card, but you certainly could if you wanted to. I wanted to show two different cards that had that rectangle frame or squiggly rectangle in a couple different ways, but I think it just adds a fun frame. It adds a pop of color, and I like the combination of that yellow as well as that red for this particular theme. It's not two colors that I put together very often, but I think it works perfectly for this theme. To add just a touch of sparkly texture, I'm going to use a little bit of stickles on top of the birthday hat as well as the hearts on the sweater. Again, it just adds that bit of texture. I use an iridescent one, so it doesn't cover any of the color at all. It just adds that sparkly texture to it. And I think it takes the images to a next level because it has some more texture. For the last card here, I'm going to be using that saffron squiggly rectangle around the outside edge, and then I'm going to be using my little hot dog with the balloon as well as one of the sentiments with that. I'm going to add a little bit of that stickles on the base of that balloon, and then before that's even dry, I'm going to put some of that glossy accents over top of that balloon. So again, we're going to have that glossy dome dimension from the glossy accents, but underneath that, we're going to have the sparkle from the stickles that are underneath there, just to give it that little bit of sparkle, that little bit of domed glossy dimension. And we're also put that on the mustard as well to give that some gloss as well. So here is the final result. You can't really see the sparkle in the balloon on the video, but in real life, it just takes it to the next level. It makes that card a little bit more special. You could just use the glossy accents on there, but I do like the stickles underneath that for that particular balloon. Then we have our hot diggity dog with the little sweater on him as well as the birthday hat that has just a touch of sparkle from those stickles. And then our super fun condiment card. We condiment each other, and I love the glossy accents on the love you as well as the hot dog. It just gives it a little bit of extra texture as well. Now you'll find everything that I've used listed and linked in the description box below. So if I've forgotten to mention something, you'll likely find the answers down in there. The second card here has that Frank in the box with the blue and the red plaid on the back. And then our very first one, Frank's for being a friend. I just love all the different texture you get from all the details on this die set. Just such a fun one to create with. This one would be great for like a barbecue invitation or something like that. I think it's just a fun, unique theme for a collection. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.